There is an old saying in economics: capital goes where it is treated best. It doesn't care about politics, it doesn't care about sanctions, it only cares about the spread. And yesterday, Reuters released a report that proves just how brutal that reality can be for the United States. According to traders and shipping data from Singapore to Shandong, the massive independent oil refineries in China, the so-called teapots, have quietly stopped buying oil from Venezuela. For the last year, these refineries were the lifeline for Caracas. They were the ones buying the heavy Merey-grade crude that the US tried to ban. But now, the orders are being cancelled. The tankers are being rerouted. Why? Did the US threats work? Did the recent raid and the reinstatement of sanctions scare the Chinese away? Technically, yes. But here is the problem that Washington didn't see coming. The Chinese didn't stop buying sanctioned oil. They just swapped suppliers. The Reuters report confirms that as Venezuelan oil became too risky, with price discounts narrowing and supply becoming unreliable due to the crumbling infrastructure, Chinese buyers switched their contracts to the only other country selling deep discount heavy crude, Iran. This is the definition of a strategic backfire. The United States spent the last 6 months tightening the noose around Venezuela. They wanted to cut off Maduro's cash flow. They wanted to force a political change. But all they actually accomplished was pushing the world's biggest energy buyer into the arms of their most dangerous rival in the Middle East. Instead of flowing to Caracas, billions of petro-yuan are now flowing to Tehran. This isn't just a trade adjustment. It's a geopolitical disaster. Because unlike Venezuela, which is largely a regional nuisance to the US, Iran is an active military threat. So, by trying to fix South America, the State Department has inadvertently subsidized the very drones and missiles that are currently firing at the US Navy in the Red Sea. We are watching a perfect example of what happens when politicians try to fight market forces. They squeeze the balloon in the West, and it just expanded in the East. In this video, we are going to break down the numbers from this Reuters report. We are going to look at the price spreads that drove this decision, and we are going to explain how the US sanctions policy has become a game of whack-a-mole that is slowly bankrupting American influence, one barrel at a time. To understand why this shift happened, you have to put yourself in the shoes of a refinery manager in Shandong province. These aren't state-owned giants. These are independent businesses. They operate on thin margins. They live and die by the discount. For years, Venezuelan Merey crude was their favorite feed. It was heavy, it was dirty, but most importantly, it was cheap. Because of US sanctions, no one else would touch it, so China could buy it at a massive discount, sometimes $20 below the global Brent price. But then the United States made a mistake. A few months ago, Washington temporarily lifted sanctions on Venezuela, General License 44. They thought this was a diplomatic carrot, but in the market it had a completely different effect. Suddenly, legitimate buyers like India and European traders started sniffing around Venezuelan oil again. The demand went up, and when demand goes up, the discount disappears. The price of Venezuelan oil started to rise. The spread that the Chinese refineries relied on began to shrink. At the same time, the quality of the oil coming out of Venezuela was getting worse. We are talking about infrastructure that hasn't been maintained in a decade. Traders were reporting delays in loading, water mixed in with the crude, and unpredictable shipping schedules. So, the Chinese buyers looked at the menu and saw another option: Iran. Iranian light and heavy crude is chemically similar to what they need. But unlike Venezuela, Iran's oil infrastructure is surprisingly intact. They pump reliably, they load quickly. And because the US sanctions on Iran are still 100% in force, the oil is still trading at a massive discount. The Reuters report highlights this exact calculation. The gap between Venezuelan and Iranian prices widened. It simply made no mathematical sense to deal with the headache of Caracas when Tehran was offering a better product for a lower price. This is the sanctions paradox. By trying to manage the Venezuelan situation politically, lifting sanctions, then threatening to snap them back, the US introduced volatility, and markets hate volatility. Iran, on the other hand, offers stability. It's a sanctioned stability, sure, but for a Chinese buyer, it's a constant flow. So the switch was flipped. The tankers that used to head to the Caribbean are now heading to the Persian Gulf. And this is where the economic story turns into a military nightmare. Because when you buy oil from Venezuela, you are funding a socialist government that creates migrants. But when you buy oil from Iran, you are funding a revolutionary guard that builds ballistic missiles. The US Treasury Department thought they were punishing Maduro. In reality, they were just clearing market share for the Ayatollah. This brings us to the most dangerous part of the equation, the money. If the events of the last week, the US raiding Caracas and the removal of the Venezuelan leadership, were supposed to secure the energy supply, this data shows the exact opposite is happening. The raid didn't secure the oil, it spooked the customers. The chaos and uncertainty in Venezuela right now have made Chinese buyers view the country as a liability. Who wants to send a tanker to a port occupied by US Special Forces? Who wants to sign a contract with a government that is currently being dismantled? So, the capital fled. And it fled directly into the war chest of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We have to follow the money to understand the gravity of this mistake. When China buys this Iranian oil, they don't pay in US dollars. They pay in yuan, or they use barter trade, or they settle in gold through the Shanghai exchange. This effectively sanctions-proofs the Iranian economy. Estimates suggest that Iran's oil exports have hit a 5-year high, bringing in roughly $35 to $40 billion a year. And where does that money go? It doesn't go to infrastructure projects. It goes to the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It goes to the production lines of the Shahed drones. It goes to the funding of regional proxies. Think about the irony of the current moment. Right now, the US Navy is deploying carrier strike groups to the Red Sea. They are firing $2 million interceptor missiles to shoot down $20,000 drones launched by the Houthis. Where did the Houthis get the technology for those drones? From Iran. And where did Iran get the cash to build them? From the oil sales that just spiked because the US made Venezuelan oil toxic. It is a perfect self-defeating circle. The US taxpayer is paying for the aircraft carrier to fight the drones, and the US foreign policy failure is helping to pay for the drones to fight the aircraft carrier. By destabilizing the Venezuelan supply chain with a raid, Washington didn't just lose a source of heavy crude. They inadvertently supercharged the economy of their enemy in the Middle East. China is happy. They get reliable, cheap oil. Iran is happy. They get a flood of new revenue. The only loser in this transaction is the United States, which is now facing a better funded adversary on a second front. The raid in the Caribbean might have looked like a show of strength on television, but in the ledger of global finance, it was a strategic gift to Tehran. So, what is the lesson here? For decades, American foreign policy has been based on the idea of choke points. The belief was that if you control the financial system and the sea lanes, you can simply turn off the economy of any nation you dislike. You can sanction Venezuela today, Iran tomorrow, and Russia next week. But the data from Reuters proves that this era is over. We are no longer living in a unipolar world where trade flows through a single valve controlled by Washington. We are living in a fluid hydraulic system. When the US Army landed in Venezuela to seize control, they thought they were solving the problem. They thought, we have the oil now. But the market simply flowed around them. The Chinese traders, the teapots in Shandong, didn't panic. They didn't beg the US for permission. They simply picked up the phone and called the other side of the resistance axis. The oil is still flowing. The energy is still moving to China. The only difference is who gets paid. Instead of a weakened Venezuela getting the cash, an emboldened Iran gets it. This is the law of unintended consequences. Every time the US uses force to block a connection, the Global South builds a detour. And every detour weakens the power of the dollar and strengthens the alternative alliance. The raid in Caracas will go down in history not as a victory, but as the moment the US finally lost its grip on the global energy trade. They captured the wells, but they lost the customers. And in a global economy, the customer is king. The US is left holding a broken country in South America, while China and Iran build the energy architecture of the future in the Middle East. The sanctions didn't just fail, they backfired, and the explosion is being heard all the way from the Red Sea to the South China